The morning began like any other in the quiet Maplewood neighborhood. Soft sunlight through pale curtains, birds somewhere in the distance, and the smell of fresh coffee filling the air. Clara Hayes, 36, had been enjoying her rare day off. No meetings, no deadlines, just a quiet house and the comforting hum of routine. She had taken a long shower, still half lost in thought about nothing and everything, when the knock came. It was sharp, unexpected, and pulled her out of the slow rhythm of her morning. She froze, towel wrapped around her, water still tracing lines down her shoulders. She wasn't expecting anyone. Not a delivery, not a visitor. A second knock followed, firmer this time, and then a familiar voice. "Miss Hayes?" "It's Noah!" "Sorry to bother you, it's kind of urgent." Noah Turner, her neighbor's son. He had grown up right across the street, used to mow her lawn in high school, and now, after finishing college, had returned home for the summer. Clara hadn't seen much of him lately, only brief waves from a distance, but she remembered that easy smile, that polite tone. Still, hearing his voice at her door while she stood there barely wrapped in a towel made her heart jolt in surprise. She glanced around for something to throw on. Her robe wasn't in sight. The only thing nearby was a cream-colored throw blanket on the sofa. She grabbed it, wrapped it tight around herself, and hurried to the door. When she opened it, the morning light fell across Noah's face. He stood there with a cardboard box in his hands, tall and broad-shouldered, snow-dusted hair from the light drizzle outside. He looked surprised too, though he quickly shifted his gaze to the ground. "Sorry," he said, lifting the box a little. "This was left by your porch. It says fragile. I didn't want someone to steal it or something." Clara blinked, still slightly flustered. "Oh, thank you, Noah. That's really thoughtful." He smiled awkwardly. "No problem. Didn't mean to scare you. I knocked twice, but I guess you didn't hear?" She nodded, tightening the blanket. "I was busy." He laughed softly, then stopped himself, realizing how that sounded. "Right, of course. I'll just set this down for you?" "Sure," she said, stepping aside. Noah entered carefully, setting the package on the counter. The room smelled faintly of vanilla candles and fresh soap. He looked around and smiled. "It looks the same in here," he said. "Except maybe cozier. You remember?" she asked. "Of course," he said. "You used to let me drop the mail inside when you were away. My mom always made me water your plants." She smiled, remembering those years, his teenage nervousness, the way he'd always ask if he should take off his shoes even when it wasn't necessary. Now, standing in her living room, he seemed different, confident but still kind, older but with the same warmth. He glanced at the framed photos on her wall, her with her old dog, her parents at the lake, a few travel pictures. "You've been to a lot of places," he said. "Work took me there," she replied. "But I always come back here." "Maplewood's home." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Yeah, I get that." The silence that followed wasn't awkward, just quiet. Comfortable, even. The kind that filled a space rather than emptied it. But then Clara realized how she must look. Hair damp, blanket barely covering her shoulders, eyes tired but soft. She felt suddenly self-conscious. "I should probably get dressed," she said lightly, "before you start thinking your mom's neighbor has lost all sense of decency." Noah chuckled. "You're fine, Miss Hayes." He hesitated, then added, "Actually, can I drop the miss? I mean, you've known me since I was 15. Makes me sound like a kid." She smiled. "Fair enough. Clara, then." Something shifted in the air when she said his name. Subtle, unspoken. They both felt it. "Well, Clara," he said, his voice softer now. "I'll get out of your way. Just wanted to make sure your package was safe." She nodded, trying to sound casual. "That was really kind of you, Noah. Thank you." He smiled, that same easy grin she remembered, and turned toward the door. "If you ever need help with anything around the house, just call. I'm around all summer." "I might take you up on that," she said. When he left, Clara stood there for a moment, the house suddenly too quiet again. She could still smell the faint trace of his cologne in the air, clean, subtle, like pine after rain. She shook her head, half smiling at herself. "You're being ridiculous," she whispered, but she couldn't ignore how fast her heart had been beating. or how that simple visit, that small act of kindness, had stirred something inside her. Not attraction exactly, but awareness. A reminder that connection could still surprise her, even after all these years of solitude. She spent the rest of the day trying to focus on her usual weekend chores, folding laundry, cleaning the kitchen, watering her plants. But every few minutes, her thoughts drifted back to the moment at the door, the way he'd looked away quickly, as if trying not to notice her awkward state. The respect in that small gesture. Later that evening, she sat by her window, watching the neighborhood lights flicker on one by one. Across the street, she could see the Turner's house, his parents' porch glowing under the soft yellow lamp. A shadow moved behind the curtain, probably Noah helping his dad with something. For a brief second, she caught herself smiling. It wasn't romantic, not really, more like warmth. The kind that comes when someone reminds you that you're still seen, still noticed in a quiet, human way. The next morning, she found a small folded note by her porch. It wasn't signed, but she knew the handwriting. "Sorry if I interrupted your morning yesterday. Hope I didn't cause trouble. N?" Clara chuckled softly, touched by the gesture. She slipped the note into the small ceramic dish by her keys, next to the loose change and spare buttons. Things that didn't matter much, but somehow stayed important. She didn't realize it yet. But that knock, that brief, flustered moment at her door, was about to change the calm rhythm of her life in ways she never expected. Because sometimes, the smallest interruptions hold the beginning of something extraordinary. And for Clara, that story had just begun. The next few days after that morning were quiet, though nothing in Clara's mind felt quiet at all. She found herself replaying the sound of that knock, the look on Noah's face, the warmth in his voice when he said her name. It was silly, she told herself. He was just being polite, nothing more. But every time she glanced at the small note he had left on her porch, her heart gave that strange, unwanted flutter. It was Thursday afternoon when she saw him again. The sun was bright, the air crisp with the smell of cut grass. Clara was in her front yard trying to fix a garden light that had stopped working when she heard someone behind her say, "Need help with that?" She turned, squinting against the light. Noah stood by the fence, sleeves rolled up, a small grin on his face. "You always appear when things break," she said, smiling despite herself. He shrugged. "I guess I'm good at fixing things." "Then you're in luck," she said. "This thing refuses to stay upright." He walked over, crouched beside her, and inspected the light. His hands were steady, confident, the kind that made even small action seem certain. "You've got a loose connection here," he said. "Do you have a screwdriver?" Clara went inside to grab one, and when she came back, he was sitting on the grass, waiting. The sunlight caught the edge of his hair, and for a second, she saw how grown he really was. No trace of the shy teenager who used to mow her lawn. He fixed the light easily and stood up, brushing the dirt from his hands. "Try it now," she flicked the switch. The bulb glowed softly. "You're good," she said. He smiled. "Told you." She hesitated a moment, then asked, "Do you want some iced tea?" "You've earned it," he nodded, trying not to sound too eager. "Sure." Inside, the kitchen felt cooler. She poured 2 glasses and handed him one. He leaned against the counter, glancing around the room. "You've changed a few things," he said. "The curtains, the photos," she smiled faintly. "I guess I like change in small doses." He took a sip, studying her quietly. "You always seemed like someone who kept everything under control." She laughed softly. "That's an illusion, Noah. Nobody really does." For a moment their eyes met, and something wordless passed between them. Not romantic exactly, but something human, gentle, alive. It was like seeing a reflection of their own loneliness in each other. Then his phone buzzed, breaking the moment. He looked down and sighed. "Mom wants me to help move furniture. I should go before she comes looking." "Tell her I said hi," Clara said, smiling. He nodded, but lingered for a second. "Hey, Clara," he said before leaving. "I know this sounds random, but do you ever get tired of how quiet it is here?" She paused, caught off guard. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But peace isn't so bad, is it?" "No," he said, half smiling. "Not bad at all." After he left, the silence of the house felt heavier. She sat by the window, sipping the rest of her tea, thinking about how simple that moment had been. Two people talking over nothing important. And yet, it felt like something had shifted, even if she couldn't name it. Days turned into a week. Every so often she'd see him, fixing his car, jogging past her house, waving when their eyes met. There was always that same ease in his smile, that quiet warmth that made her feel seen without trying. Then one evening, a sudden summer storm hit. Heavy rain, thunder in the distance, lights flickering. Clara was in the middle of cooking when the power went out. She sighed, lit a candle, and sat by the window, watching the rain pour down in sheets. Another knock came, soft this time, uncertain. She opened the door and saw Noah standing there, drenched from the rain, holding a flashlight. "Power's out on our side too," he said. "Thought I'd check if you were okay." She couldn't help but laugh. "You walked here in this weather?" He shrugged, rainwater dripping from his hair. "Didn't seem that far until halfway across the street." "Come in before you freeze," she said, pulling him inside. He left his shoes by the door, his clothes soaked. She handed him a towel and gestured toward the kitchen. "I made pasta. There's enough for two," he grinned. "I won't say no to that." They sat by candlelight, the storm rumbling outside. It should have been awkward, but it wasn't. They talked easily, about his college life, about her travels, about how strange it felt when the power went out and everything slowed down. "You ever think about leaving Maplewood?" he asked. "Sometimes," she said. "But then I remember no matter where you go, you take yourself with you. Might as well make peace where you are." He nodded thoughtfully. "That's kind of wise." "I've had time to practice," she said with a small smile. He looked at her, his expression soft. "I used to think you were just quiet. But you're not. You're calm. That's different." She didn't know what to say. The way he said it didn't sound like a compliment, more like an observation that came from somewhere real. The rain slowed after a while, and the flicker of lightning through the window painted the room in silver. They sat there, quiet for a moment, listening to the faint drip of water outside. When the power finally returned, the sudden brightness made them both blink. "Well," she said, standing. "Looks like the world's back on." "Yeah," he said softly. "Guess I should head home before my mom starts worrying." He grabbed his flashlight, now unnecessary, and walked toward the door. But before stepping out, he turned to her. "Clara, thanks for dinner. I mean it." "Any time," she said, her voice gentle. As he stepped into the night, she watched from the doorway, his silhouette fading into the streetlight glow. She closed the door slowly, feeling something unexpected. A kind of quiet ache that wasn't sadness exactly, but longing. The next morning, she found another note by her porch. This one was shorter. "Next time it rains, I'm bringing dessert," she smiled, holding the note a little longer than she needed to. Something in her life, something still unnamed, had begun to wake up again. She didn't know what it was, or where it was heading. But for the first time in a long while, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt like waiting. And maybe, she thought, waiting wasn't such a bad thing after all. Summer passed quickly, and with it came a strange new rhythm between Clara and Noah. They didn't plan it, but somehow he started showing up more often, to help trim her hedges, fix the loose handle on her gate, or just share a quiet coffee on her porch when the evenings were golden and calm. It all felt natural, unspoken, but inside, both of them knew there was something shifting, something neither of them dared to name. Clara told herself it was friendship, just two neighbors spending time together. But she also noticed how her heart reacted differently now. When she saw him walking across the street, her pulse quickened. When he smiled, the day seemed lighter. It was an easy happiness, but one that carried a quiet fear with it. Fear of being misunderstood, of crossing lines she wasn't sure existed. One afternoon, she was sitting outside reading when Noah stopped by with 2 lemonades. "Peace offering," he said, handing her one. "You yelled at me last week for cutting the wrong hedge," she laughed. "I didn't yell," I corrected. "Same thing," he teased. They sat under the shade of her porch, sipping lemonade and watching the quiet street. The air smelled like summer rain, even though the sky was clear. He told her about a photography job he'd been offered in Oregon, a chance to travel for a few months and work with a small magazine. "That sounds amazing," she said. "You should go," he hesitated. "Yeah, I might." "You don't sound sure." He shrugged. "It's far, and I don't know. I just started feeling like I belong here again." Clara looked at him, realizing what he meant. She wanted to tell him not to stay for anyone but himself, but the words stuck. He was still young, still building his life, and she didn't want to be the reason he held back. So she smiled and said, "Sometimes leaving helps you come back stronger." He nodded, but his eyes stayed on her a moment longer than they should have. The days that followed were quieter. He didn't come by as often, and when he did, there was a softness in the air. Polite smiles, shorter conversations, pauses that lasted too long. Clara tried to focus on work, but everything felt slightly off, like a song missing its rhythm. Then one evening, she saw his family loading boxes into their car. Her heart sank before she even asked why. Noah crossed the street and smiled faintly. "I guess I'm leaving sooner than I thought. Got the call today. They need me next week." "That's great," she said, trying to sound happy. "You'll do amazing," he nodded. "I hope so." A silence stretched between them, filled with everything neither wanted to say. Finally, he exhaled and said softly, "I'll miss this." She looked away, afraid her eyes would give her away. "It's only a few months." "Yeah," he said. "Just a few months." They stood there for a moment longer before he said goodbye. She watched him walk away, his figure fading into the glow of the streetlight, and felt something inside her shift, a quiet ache she hadn't expected to feel so deeply. The next week felt emptier than she imagined. She still saw his family around, still heard the faint noise from their backyard, but the house across the street seemed quieter now. Every evening she found herself sitting by the window, watching the same spot where he'd usually wave before heading home. A few days later, a small package arrived at her door. Inside was a photograph. Her garden, caught in the evening light, the flowers glowing like they were made of gold. At the bottom, written in neat handwriting, "Thought you'd like to see how peaceful it looked from my side." N. Clara smiled, her eyes stinging a little. She placed the photo on her shelf next to her travel pictures. It didn't belong with the past. It felt like something in between. Weeks passed. She got used to the quiet again. She worked, met friends, tried to fill her days, but there were small reminders everywhere. The garden light he'd fixed, the mug he'd used for lemonade, the towel he'd left behind that rainy night. Every object seemed to whisper his name. Then, one late afternoon, her phone buzzed with a text. "Hey, Oregon's beautiful, but it rains even more here. I miss our porch talks." She read it twice before replying, "Maybe you just miss my lemonade." His answer came a few seconds later. Maybe both. That small exchange opened something between them again. Over the next few weeks, they started texting more, short messages about their days, funny moments, random thoughts. It was simple, harmless, but the connection felt real. He sent her photos from his travels, mountains, city lights, quiet lakes. She sent him snippets of her everyday life, a blooming rose, her messy painting, the cat that liked sleeping on her porch. Somehow the distance made their words more honest. They didn't talk about feelings, but they didn't need to. It was there in everything they shared. Then one evening he called. "I wanted to hear your voice," he said simply. Clara laughed softly, caught off guard. "That's not much of an introduction." "I'm bad at small talk," he said, "but good at missing people." Her heart ached at how natural it felt, how easily his voice filled the silence she'd grown used to. They talked for an hour, about work, about the stars, about nothing in particular. And when they hung up, she felt lighter, but also afraid. Afraid of caring too much. A few nights later, she stood outside under the same stars they'd talked about, wondering when admiration had turned into something more. It wasn't about age or circumstance. It was about how he made her feel seen in ways she hadn't allowed herself to be for years. She didn't know if it was right or wrong, only that it was real. Months passed, and as autumn began to touch Maplewood, Noah texted again. "I'll be home next week. I owe you a lemonade." Clara smiled at the screen, a quiet mix of excitement and uncertainty running through her. She typed back, "You still remember the recipe?" "Every detail," he replied. That night she stood by the window again, just like before, but this time, the waiting didn't feel lonely. It felt alive, expectant, full of the small kind of hope that grows quietly between people who never plan to find each other. She didn't know what would happen when he came back, but she knew one thing: life had already changed. The quiet that once felt empty now held meaning, because sometimes distance doesn't end something. It just teaches you how much it matters. And when Noah came back to Maplewood, the first snow of the season had just started to fall when Clara saw the familiar car pull up across the street. She froze by her window, breath catching as Noah stepped out, carrying a small bag and wearing that same worn jacket she used to tease him about. For a second, she didn't move. So many months had passed, texts, calls, unspoken words. And yet the sight of him standing there made it feel like no time had passed at all. He looked up toward her porch light, as if he knew she'd be watching. Their eyes met through the soft blur of snow, and he smiled, that same gentle, knowing smile that always seemed to find its way past her guard. Clara's heart thudded, and before she could think, she was at the door. She didn't even have time to grab a coat. When she opened it, cold air rushed in, and there he was. "Hey," he said softly, brushing snow off his hair. "You look exactly the same," she laughed quietly. "And you look colder than ever. Get inside before you freeze." He stepped in, his boots leaving wet marks on the floor, but neither of them cared. The house felt warmer instantly, not because of the heater, but because of his presence. "Welcome home," she said finally. "Feels good to hear that," he replied, his voice steady but full of emotion. For a moment, they just stood there. Two people who had crossed the quiet distance between seasons, trying to figure out how to speak after months of silence. She motioned toward the kitchen. "I was about to make tea. Or lemonade if you're feeling nostalgic. Tea's perfect," he said with a grin. "I think I've had enough lemonade to last a lifetime." They sat at the kitchen table, the same one where he'd helped her fix a broken drawer months ago. Everything felt familiar but different, softer, slower, filled with a kind of unspoken warmth. "So," she said, breaking the quiet, "how was Oregon?" "Beautiful," he answered. "It rained almost every day, but I didn't mind. I took a lot of photos. Learned a lot, too." He paused, looking at her. "But it wasn't home." She looked down at her cup. "Maplewood missed you," he smiled gently. "Did you?" Her fingers tightened around the mug. She could have laughed it off, made a light joke. But instead, she looked up and said softly, "Yeah, I did." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy with honesty. Noah nodded slowly, his eyes steady on hers. "I thought about you more than I probably should have," he said, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. "Not just the porch talks, everything." Clara's heart trembled at his words. She wanted to tell him she'd thought of him too, in the mornings when she watered her plants, in the evenings when the house felt too still. But she also knew that saying it out loud would change things forever. Instead, she smiled faintly and said, "Well, I'm glad you came back. The garden's been missing your touch." He laughed softly, letting her change the subject, but his eyes lingered, warm, thoughtful, searching. The next few days passed like a quiet dream. Noah started helping her again around the house, trimming the trees, repainting her old fence, bringing her fresh coffee on weekends. The routine returned, but this time it carried something deeper, something they no longer pretended didn't exist. One evening, as they sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, watching the snow fall under the streetlight, Clara finally asked the question that had been waiting inside her for months. Why did you really come back, Noah? He hesitated for a moment, then turned to her. Because Oregon was beautiful, but every picture I took, every place I went, I kept wishing you were there to see it. I didn't want to build a life somewhere that didn't feel connected to you. Her throat tightened. You shouldn't give up opportunities for me, she said softly. He shook his head. It's not giving up if it feels right. For a long moment, neither spoke. Snow kept falling, blanketing the quiet world around them. Then Clara whispered, I was afraid you'd forget me. He looked at her like he couldn't believe she'd say that. Forget you? Clara, you were the one person who made me feel like I wasn't lost. You reminded me what it means to care about something real. The air between them felt fragile, like one more breath could shatter it. Clara's eyes glistened. You have a way of saying things that make it hard to stay guarded, he smiled. Then maybe stop trying to be. That made her laugh softly, a laugh mixed with tears. And in that simple moment, without any grand confession or promises, something between them finally settled. Days turned into weeks. They started spending their evenings walking through the snowy streets, sharing stories, laughter, and quiet silences that felt more intimate than words. People noticed, of course. Maplewood was small, but neither cared. It wasn't about what anyone thought. It was about what they'd both learned, that connection doesn't ask for permission. It just happens when two hearts stop pretending not to care. One morning, as the snow began to melt, Noah came by with a small envelope. What's this? Clara asked. Something I've been working on, he said, a little nervous. Inside was a photograph. Her porch, captured at sunset. The light hit the railing just right, turning everything golden. But it wasn't the porch that caught her breath. It was the reflection in the window. Her, standing there, looking out, the faintest smile on her face. I took that before I left, he said quietly. I didn't show you then because I think I wasn't ready to admit what it meant. Clara's voice trembled. And now? Now, he said, meeting her gaze. I know what it means. It's home. Tears blurred her vision, but she smiled through them. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She simply reached out and took his hand, holding it gently, as if acknowledging everything they'd been through. The distance, the doubt, the quiet longing that had led them here. Outside, the snow began to fall again, softly, silently, covering the street in white. But this time, the world didn't feel cold. It felt new. Later that evening, Clara stood at her window once more, watching the lights across the street glow warm and steady. Noah was there, waving at her just like he used to. She waved back, smiling. But this time it wasn't about waiting or wondering. It was about knowing. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive with noise or timing that makes sense. It slips quietly into your life, through kindness, laughter, shared moments, until one day you realize it's been there all along. Clara didn't need to hold back anymore. She'd learned that letting go wasn't about losing control. It was about trusting that what's real will always find its way back. And on that snowy night in Maplewood, as their lights glowed across the street from each other, it did.